Imagine waking up in ancient Egypt. The sun is already rising. It's going to be hot. Very hot. You've been sweating. There's dust on your skin. Sand somehow seems to have found its way into places sand should never be. And now, you desperately need a shower. There's just one problem. Your shower doesn't exist. No faucet. No bathtub with running water. No shampoo. No modern soap. And definitely no hot water heater. So, how did ancient Egyptians actually get clean? Did they simply jump into the Nile? Did rich Egyptians have private bathrooms? What did they use instead of soap? And perhaps most importantly, did ancient Egypt smell as bad as we're imagining? The answer is actually much more surprising than you might think, because ancient Egyptians cared a lot about cleanliness. In fact, some of their bathing habits were surprisingly sophisticated. But if you were poor, your morning routine looked very different from the pharaohs. So let's start with an ordinary Egyptian. You wake up inside a mud brick house. Maybe you're a farmer. Maybe you're a craftsman. Maybe you're one of the thousands of people working near the Nile. Your home doesn't have running water, which means turning a handle and watching clean water pour from a wall would look like actual magic. Every drop of water you use has to come from somewhere. Someone has to carry it. That could mean bringing water from the Nile, from a canal, from a well, or from another nearby source. And water is heavy. A single large container filled with water can be exhausting to carry. So you're probably not going to waste 20 gallons of it standing under a luxurious shower. For many ordinary Egyptians, washing could be much simpler. Water, a basin, a container, your hands, and whatever cleaning materials you could afford. And yes, people could also wash themselves in or near the Nile and its canals. Which sounds refreshing, until you remember, this isn't a swimming pool. There's no chlorine. No lifeguard. And the Nile is also being used for transportation, agriculture, fishing, animals, and everyday life. Still, when you live in one of the hottest environments on Earth, water is water. And Egyptians had good reasons to keep themselves clean. The heat wasn't gentle. During hot periods, sweat could become a constant part of life. Then add dust, sand, smoke from cooking fires, animal waste, physical labor, and insects. Lots of insects. If you spent your entire day working outside, you probably didn't return home smelling like roses. Although, as we'll see later, ancient Egyptians had a solution for that too. But first, what did they actually wash with? Because this is where things get interesting. If you handed an ancient Egyptian a modern bottle of body wash, they'd probably have no idea what they were looking at. But that doesn't mean they had nothing resembling a cleaning product. Egyptians had access to alkaline substances such as natron. Natron was a naturally occurring mixture of salts found in Egypt. And if that word sounds familiar, there's a reason. Natron was also famously used during mummification. So yes, a substance associated with drying out dead bodies was also useful in the world of cleaning and purification. Ancient Egyptians also knew various preparations involving oils, fats, alkaline materials, and other ingredients. Some could function in ways that were somewhat similar to soap. Not exactly the colorful bar sitting next to your sink, but enough to help remove dirt and grease. And cleanliness wasn't only about appearance. For Egyptians, washing could also have religious importance. Purification was deeply connected with temple life. Priests had especially strict expectations surrounding cleanliness. Before participating in sacred rituals, washing and purification mattered. Body hair could also be removed. Hair itself creates another fascinating part of Egyptian hygiene, because when you look at ancient Egyptian art, you see beautiful hair everywhere. Long hair, perfect hair, hair that somehow looks flawless despite living next to a desert. But some of that hair wasn't actually attached to the person's head. Wigs were popular among certain Egyptians, and shaving or closely cropping natural hair could have practical advantages, especially when dealing with lice. Think about it. You're living thousands of years before modern insecticides. People live close together. The climate is hot. Parasites love you. Removing hair can make some hygiene problems easier to manage. Then, when you want to look impressive, you put on a wig. Ancient problem. Surprisingly clever solution. But now let's say you're not an ordinary farmer. You're rich. Very rich. Maybe you're an important official. You walk into your large Egyptian home. And unlike most people, you may actually have something recognizable as a bathroom. Don't get too excited. You're not getting a jacuzzi. But archaeologists have found bathing areas associated with elite Egyptian houses and palaces. and some were surprisingly clever. Imagine a small room. On the floor is a stone slab, often with raised edges. You stand on it. Nearby, a servant has containers of water. Then the servant pours water over you. Congratulations. You have just invented a shower. Except the plumbing is a human being. The water runs off the stone surface. A small channel or drain can guide the wastewater away, sometimes into a container that has to be emptied later. There is no endless stream of water coming through pipes. No pressure control. No temperature dial. Your servant is basically the faucet. Want more water? Ask the faucet. Too cold? Complain to the faucet. Finished? The faucet now has to clean everything up. For the wealthy, this system could make bathing much more private and comfortable. And in some elite residences, bathing areas were located near other private rooms. But even then, the house generally wasn't connected to anything resembling a modern municipal water system. Fresh water still had to be brought in. Container, after container, after container, which means one person's comfortable bath might involve a lot of work for several other people. And this gives us one of the biggest differences between rich and poor Egyptians. It wasn't necessarily that rich Egyptians had magical technology nobody else understood. They had labor. If you're poor, you carry your own water. If you're rich, someone else carries it for you. If you're very rich, someone else may pour it over your head while you stand on a specially built stone floor. And if you're the pharaoh, well, you probably aren't worried about who's carrying the water. But getting wet is only half the problem. Because after spending the day under the Egyptian sun, you don't just want to remove dirt. You want to smell better. And ancient Egyptians took fragrance seriously. Oils, ointments, and perfumes were important parts of personal care, especially among people who could afford them. Remember, there's no modern deodorant, no antiperspirant, and you're living in a hot climate. So scented oils and aromatic substances were extremely valuable. After washing, you could apply oil to your skin. That could help with dryness in Egypt's climate, while scented ingredients helped make you smell considerably better. And Egyptians became famous for their cosmetics and fragrances. This was a civilization that could take something as ordinary as personal grooming and turn it into art. Imagine the complete routine. You wash. You remove unwanted hair. You apply oils. You use fragrance. You put on clean linen. You apply eye makeup. You put on jewelry. Maybe a wig. Suddenly, ancient Egypt doesn't seem quite as dirty as Hollywood makes it look. At least, if you're wealthy. Because wealth changes everything. Let's compare two people. First, an ordinary agricultural worker. You've spent most of the day outside. Your skin is covered in sweat and dirt. When work ends, you don't walk into a private tiled bathroom. You might wash with water from a river, canal, basin, or container. You use what you have. You clean yourself. Maybe you apply some oil if it's available. Then you put on your linen clothing and prepare to do it all again tomorrow. Now imagine an elite official. Your home may have a dedicated washing area. Servants bring water. You stand on a stone bathing platform. Someone pours the water. You have access to better oils, better fragrances, more clothing, cosmetics, razors, wigs. Your bathroom still wouldn't impress someone from the 21st century. But compared with the average person outside, you're living in luxury. And then there were priests. For them, cleanliness could become something more than personal comfort. It could become part of religious duty. Temples were sacred spaces, and ritual purification was important. Washing wasn't simply, I smell bad. It could be connected with preparing yourself to approach the divine. Natron itself could have ritual significance. Water could represent purification, and cleanliness could become part of the boundary between everyday life and sacred space. So when an Egyptian priest washed, he wasn't necessarily just preparing for another hot day. He could be preparing to enter the presence of a god. But there's another question. How often did Egyptians actually bathe? And this is where we need to be careful. Ancient Egypt lasted for thousands of years. Think about that. Thousands of years. It stretched across different dynasties, different cities, different economic classes, and enormous social changes. So there was no single Egyptian bathing routine that everyone followed for 3,000 years. A farmer in one period, a priest in another, and a wealthy official living in Amarna could have very different routines. That's important, because when we say ancient Egyptians did this, we're talking about millions of people across an enormous period of time. Still, The archaeological evidence makes one thing clear. Washing mattered. Containers used for washing existed. Special bathing areas existed among the elite. Cleaning substances existed. Razors existed. Cosmetics existed. Perfumes existed. And purification was important enough to become part of religion itself. But there's one uncomfortable problem we haven't talked about. Where did the dirty water go? Today, you take a shower. The water disappears down the drain. You never think about it again. Ancient Egypt wasn't that simple. Without modern sewer systems, wastewater had to be managed locally. In some elite bathing areas, the floor could direct water toward a drain or spout. But that didn't necessarily mean the water entered some giant underground sewer. It might simply flow into a container, which then had to be emptied. Again, someone has to do the work. Ancient Egyptian luxury often depended on something we don't see in tomb paintings. Labor. Someone carries the water in. Someone pours it. Someone removes the dirty water. Someone washes the linen. Someone prepares the oils. Someone maintains the house. The pharaoh may look perfectly clean, but somewhere nearby, somebody is having a very long day. And speaking of linen, your clothes also need cleaning. Egyptians were famous for linen clothing. Light linen made sense in a hot climate, but bright linen looks impressive only when it isn't covered in dirt. Laundry was serious work. Clothes could be washed with water and cleaning substances, then beaten, rinsed, dried, and prepared for use again. And once again, the Nile played an enormous role. The river wasn't just something Egyptians looked at while building pyramids. It supported nearly every part of life: food, farming, transportation, fishing, industry, drinking, washing. Without the Nile, there is no ancient Egypt as we know it. Which means your ancient Egyptian bath ultimately depends on the same thing as almost everything else in your life: the river. But here's the strange part. Ancient Egyptians may have been cleaner in some ways than many people imagine, while also living with hygiene risks that would horrify us today. Their water wasn't treated in modern purification plants. They didn't understand microorganisms the way we do. There were parasites, insects. Contaminated water could cause serious problems. Medicine was limited, and a tiny infection that we could treat easily today could become dangerous. So their obsession with washing wasn't pointless. In a hot environment, keeping your body clean could be genuinely useful. Even if they didn't understand bacteria, they absolutely understood dirt, odor, skin problems, and the difference between feeling clean and feeling disgusting. And perhaps that's what makes Egyptian bathing so fascinating. They were separated from us by thousands of years. Their bathrooms looked completely different. Their soap looked different. Their plumbing barely existed by modern standards. Yet the basic human experience was exactly the same. You wake up, you're dirty, you're sweaty, you smell terrible, and you want to fix it. Some things never change. So, could you handle bath time in ancient Egypt? Let's find out. You wake up tomorrow morning. 3,000 years in the past. No shower, no sink, no running water, no shampoo, no deodorant, no fluffy towel waiting for you. If you're poor, you may have to collect or carry the water yourself. Then wash using a basin, a container, or perhaps head toward a nearby water source. If you're rich, you're luckier. A servant brings the water. You stand on your stone bathing slab. The water is poured over you. You clean yourself. Then you use oils and fragrances. Maybe you shave. Maybe you put on a wig. You dress in fresh linen. You apply your cosmetics. And now, you smell significantly better than you did 15 minutes ago. Not exactly a modern shower, but surprisingly effective. The real problem comes tomorrow, because you have to do it again, and the next day, and the next, without ever turning a faucet. So the next time you step into your bathroom, turn on the shower, adjust the temperature perfectly, and get unlimited clean water simply by moving your hand. Remember this. For most of human history, that would have looked like the luxury of a pharaoh, and maybe even better, because your shower doesn't require a servant standing next to you with a giant jar of water. If you had to spend 1 week in ancient Egypt, what would you miss first? Your shower? Your toilet? Your air conditioner? Or your phone? And if you think ancient Egyptian bathrooms were strange, wait until you see what happened when an ancient Egyptian got sick.